Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Velayat News with me, Abroo Sabzwari, and now a look at the headlines for today. Iran's President-elect Hassan Rouhani vows more transparency on Iran's nuclear issues. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad says Europe will pay the price if it arms Syrian militants. In Saudi Arabia, prisoners are on a hunger strike to protest their inhumane imprisonment conditions pending trial without charge. Russia's President Vladimir Putin faces isolation over Syria at the G8 summit. The al-Assad Foundation for Endowment and Heritage is appealing to Muslim nations worldwide to urgently take action to save the al-Assad Mosque. Saudi Arabia is restricting the number of pilgrims for this year's Hajj in ongoing expansions at the holy sites in Mecca. 3 men and a police officer have been stabbed inside a mosque in the Ward End area of the city in UK. The US government has finally identified the men on Guantanamo's indefinite detainee list who till now were kept hidden from the public. In Brazil, tens of thousands of people protest in Sao Paulo against rising transportation prices and excess spending costs on the 2014 World Cup. And now the news in detail. Iran's President-elect Hassan Rouhani says Iran is ready to show even more transparency on its nuclear program. In his first news conference since Friday's election, Mr. Rouhani discussed the unfair sanctions imposed on his country, adding that Tehran would not suspend uranium enrichment activities. The West suspects Iran of trying to develop nuclear weapons, while Iran continues to say its program is entirely peaceful. The US and Russia both expressed hope of progress on resolving the issue. Speaking after talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin at the G8 summit in Northern Ireland, US President Barack Obama said they had expressed cautious optimism following last Friday's elections, stating that we may be able to move forward on a dialogue that allows us to resolve the problems with Iran's nuclear program. UK Foreign Secretary William Hague said the government hopes that following Dr. Rouhani's election, the Iranian government will take up the opportunity of a new relationship with the international community by making every effort to reach a negotiated settlement on the nuclear issue. In a packed hall in Iran's capital city, Tehran, Mr. Rouhani stated that our nuclear programs are completely transparent, but we are ready to show greater transparency and make clear for the whole world that the steps of the Islamic Republic of Iran are completely within international frameworks. He also stressed that he would oppose halting Iran's uranium enrichment, a key stumbling block in the continuing talks between Tehran and world powers. Western allies have indicated they are willing to engage with the new Iranian president, who is seen as more moderate compared to the other 5 contenders. In Saudi Arabia, more than 70 inmates have stopped eating in a bid to draw international attention to the inhumane prison conditions in Saudi Arabia. They hope their protests will prompt immediate action to stop the gross violation of human rights in Saudi jails. Saudi activists say there are more than 40,000 political prisoners, mostly prisoners of conscience, in jails across the kingdom. According to the activists, most of the detained political prisoners are being held by the government without trial or legitimate charges. Some of the detainees are reported to have been held without trial for more than 16 years. Families and relatives of political prisoners have held several public gatherings in major cities, including Riyadh, Mecca, and Medina. However, their protests have failed to bear any results. Since February 2011, protesters have held demonstrations on an almost regular basis in Saudi Arabia, primarily calling for the release of all political prisoners, freedom of expression and assembly, and an end to widespread discrimination. Demonstrations have turned into protests against Saudi Arabia, especially after November 2011, when Saudi security forces killed 5 protesters and injured many others. According to the Human Rights Watch, Saudi Arabia routinely represses expression critical of the government. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad says European countries will pay the price if they send weapons to foreign-backed militants in the Arab country. Quoted by the German daily Frankfurter on Monday, President Assad stated that if the Europeans deliver weapons, then Europe's backyard will become terrorist-like and Europe will pay the price. Assad also rejected the U.S., British, and French claims that Syrian forces had used any chemical weapons against the foreign-backed militants fighting in the country, adding that if Paris, London, and Washington had any piece of evidence, they would have presented it publicly. Syria's Deputy Foreign Minister Faisal Muqdad also criticized discussions by Western countries on arming Syrian militants, saying they are incitement to murder and unacceptable on a human and moral level. The comments came after U.S. President Barack Obama ordered his administration last week to provide militants in Syria with weapons, claiming that the Syrian government had crossed Washington's red line for using chemical weapons. Both Britain and France have also discussed the prospect of arming the militants who have been battling to overthrow the government of President Bashar al-Assad for more than 2 years. Discussions on the delivery of weapons to Syria came days after foreign-sponsored militants suffered heavy losses in confrontation with the Syrian army. The Syrian crisis began in March 2011, and many people, including large numbers of government forces, have been killed as a result. Russian President Vladimir Putin faced further isolation today on the second day of a G8 summit as world leaders lined up to pressure him into toning down his support for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Following an icy encounter between the Kremlin chief and U.S. President Barack Obama late on Monday, the G8 leaders will seek to find resolution to a war that has prompted powers across the Middle East to square off on sectarian lines.
There are very big differences between the analysis we have of what happened in Syria and who is to blame. But where there is common ground is we both see a humanitarian catastrophe. We both see the dangers of instability and extremism. We both want to see a peace conference and a transition.
Putin faced a barrage of criticism from Western leaders for supporting Assad and the Syrian's president's attempt to crush a 2-year-old uprising in which at least 93,000 people have been killed so far. Divisions over Syria dominated the atmosphere as global leaders met in Northern Ireland, a place once rocked by decades of violence, with Britain now wants to showcase as a model of conflict resolution. Putin and Obama appeared tense as they addressed reporters late on Monday after about 2 hours of talks. Putin said Moscow and Washington had differing views on Syria but agreed the bloodshed must stop and the opposing parties should be brought to the negotiating table. The Al-Aqsa Foundation for Endowment and Heritage appealed to Muslim nations worldwide to urgently take action to save the Al-Aqsa Mosque from Judaization, warning that the mosque is facing fateful and critical moments. In a press release on Sunday, the Al-Aqsa Foundation said Jews prepared detailed maps, blueprints, models, and tools to build their alleged temple on the ruins of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It asserted that Israel's Channel 2 broadcast a report on Saturday evening about the process of building the alleged Temple of Solomon and revealed that there are materials and tools in place to be used in the construction process. The foundation also noted that the release of such a report took place a few days after a horde of Israeli right-wing journalists and media figures defiled the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Their news agencies at the same time made special reports confirming that Israeli and its Jewish arms had prepared plans to carry out a major assault on Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is Islam's third holiest site after the Kaaba in Mecca and the Prophet's Mosque in Medina, both of which are located in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is restricting the number of pilgrims for this year's Hajj over the ongoing expansions at the holy site in Mecca, appealing to the faithful to postpone their spiritual journeys. Bandar Hajr, the minister of Hajj, was quoted as saying that this is an exceptional and temporary decision, adding that the expansion plans of Al-Masjid al-Haram aim to provide safety as much service as possible for pilgrims. Saudi authorities said they will reduce the number of pilgrims coming from within the kingdom by half. The numbers of overseas pilgrims will be reduced by 20%. Saudi officials say the cuts aim to avoid stampedes during Hajj and ensure the safety of the pilgrims. Saudi Arabia is currently working to expand the 2 holy mosques in Mecca to accommodate more pilgrims in the coming years. Approved by King Abdullah bin Abdul Aziz in 2011, the latest expansion would cover an area of 400,000 square meters to accommodate 1.2 million worshippers. The total area of the existing Haram Mosque is 356,000 square meters, accommodating 770,000 worshippers. The Mataf, the circumambulation areas around the Kaaba, will also see expansion soon. Hatem Qadi, the deputy Hajj minister and spokesman of the ministry, underlined the need to reduce the number of foreign and domestic pilgrims this year, stating that the period for cutting the number of pilgrims will not exceed 2 years. Muslims from around the world travel to Mecca every year to perform the spiritual journey of Hajj. Around 3.1 million pilgrims performed Hajj last year, most of them from abroad. 3 men and a police officer have been stabbed inside a mosque in Birmingham, England. The officer was attacked after he responded to reports of the stabbing inside the mosque in the Ward End area of the city. 31-year-old officer Adam Koch said he could have died if it was not for the great community's effort to confront the attacker. Mr. Koch said he owes those people a massive debt of thanks and help after running towards the man they had already seen brandishing a large knife. The incident began during the final prayer session of the evening. A 32-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and is currently in custody. Dr. Arshad Mahmood, who was at the mosque, told BBC that a man started stabbing one of the guys who was sitting right next to him. When the officer came for help with the other men, he was also attacked and stabbed. Masood Shajareh, chairman of IHRC, said Muslims feel scared right now, and it is completely understandable. He added that Muslims have been physically attacked, mosques burnt down, cemeteries vandalized, and social media sites are full of anti-Muslim hatred, putting out violent threats against Muslims, adding that more needs to be done to protect the Muslim community. Police officer Mr. Koch said he intended to visit the mosque and ask the imam to pass on his gratitude to the worshippers who helped him. The 4 men are being treated in the hospital for their wounds and are described to be in stable condition. The U.S. government has finally released the names of the 46 men being held in Guantanamo under the classification of indefinite detainees, meaning terror suspects deemed too dangerous to release or move, yet impossible to try in a civilian or military court for reasons of inadequate or tainted evidence. The Obama administration had until now refused to reveal the identities of these men, leaving them in a form of prolonged legal limbo. The list of the 46 detainees was released to the Miami Herald and New York Times following a Freedom of Information request from the papers as part of the list of the 166 current captives in Guantanamo that has been released for the first time. The list contains, according to the Miami Herald, 26 Yemenis, 12 Afghans, 3 Saudis, 2 Kuwaitis and Libyans, a Kenyan, Moroccan, and a Somali. There were 2 indefinite detainees, both Afghans, who have died in the camp, one by suicide and one from a heart attack. The group of captives stuck in this legal wilderness has been one of the most controversial aspects of the detention camp. The U.S. justifies their existence through a range of explanations that include the fact that they were subjected to harsh interrogation techniques that have been denounced as a form of torture, rendering their evidence inadmissible in court. 104 detainees are currently on a hunger strike in the camp in protest at their prolonged detention without hope of legal resolution. Tens of thousands of people marched through Brazil's largest city, Sao Paulo, on Monday as protests spread over rising public transport prices and the cost of staging the 2014 World Cup. Marches took place in several other cities, including the capital Brasilia, where demonstrators climbed onto the roof of the National Congress building. Protesters also clashed with police near Rio de Janeiro's State Assembly. The unrest began last week after the announcement of increased bus fares. The complaints of demonstrators soon extended the beyond transport costs when clashes in Sao Paulo led to claims of excessive use of force by police. Dozens of people were hurt, including several journalists. Since then, protesters have voiced frustration at public transport, security, health, and the extent of public investment in 2 international football tournaments. And that brings us to the end of our bulletin today. If you'd like to contribute your community's news and events, you can email us at news@VelayatTV.org. You can also catch the latest headlines and more by logging on to our website, VelayatTV.org, or follow us on our YouTube and Facebook pages, Velayat TV USA. Many thanks for joining us. Till next time, I'm Abroo Sabzwari.